Hey, what's going on, U.S. History people? This is Mr. Norris.
And Mr. Lawrence.
And we have video 31 for you today. This one is on U.S. overseas expansion in the late 19th and early 20th century. So we're talking the late 1800s, early 1900s. Now, four major reasons you should be familiar with for U.S. overseas expansion beyond the continental borders of the United States. The first one is economic opportunities or financial reasons. Two is going to be racial theories. The third one is competition with European empires. And then the fourth is the perception that the frontier was closed. So, Mr. Lawrence, why don't you tell us about economic opportunities?
All right, so one of these four reasons is economic opportunities, as you just mentioned, Mr. Norris. And this is, I would say, probably one of the most significant reasons why Americans try to expand and take more territory outside the continental United States. So American companies sought markets overseas. So markets are a place where people can do what with their goods?
Trade.
They can trade, they can sell, ultimately trying to make money and make a profit. So U.S. plantation owners in Hawaii called for annexation of the chain of islands. So in 1898, the U.S. will annex or take control of Hawaii. Business opportunities specifically in China also with part of the open door policy. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in class, and it goes back to your Global 2 days of the spheres of influence and European as well as other Asian countries and the United States trying to gain influence in China.
All right, jumping over to racial theory. Some people are going to seek to civilize non-white nations or spread Western white culture. We have a famous poem that you probably are familiar with from Global 2 called The White Man's Burden, written by Rudyard Kipling, in which he argued that the Western civilizations should spread their civilizations throughout the world. And then also we have a gentleman by the name of Josiah Strong who wrote Our Country, and he argued that the Anglo-Saxon or white European race was superior and should spread Christianity throughout the world.
So not only does the United States feel the need to expand its power throughout the world, so do European countries that you have studied throughout global history, and also we've talked about early on in American history as well. So there is competition from many European empires that the United States will face. There is the theory of the late 1800s, early 1900s of something known as social Darwinism, which applied the idea that the strongest will survive, and that applies to countries as well. So it was almost this innate belief that if you are a strong, powerful nation, you almost had a right to dominate weaker nations. So the idea of Darwinism taken from the natural world and applied to politics. Also, a very influential book was written in the 1890s by Alfred T. Mahan's The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, and many nations, including the people in the United States, saw this as kind of a reason to start to grow the major military force of the time, which was the Navy. Many argued that a stronger Navy is vital for the power of the world. Specifically, this guy in the bottom right, who is
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt, former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, correct, Mr. Norris?
That is correct.
Who, again, will advocate for a strong Navy to really spread American power throughout the globe. And as we have here, it was read by Teddy Roosevelt and other European leaders. So it was a major influence on the development of militarization, specifically with the Navy of the late early 1900s.
Which we'll see in the next video about the Spanish-American War. All right, finally, there's this perception that the frontier was closed. And what that means is the frontier is where essentially civilization meets the wilderness in the country. And this guy, Frederick Jackson Turner, in his frontier thesis, basically argued that the frontier was closed and all available land was used up in the United States. So if somebody wanted to acquire more land, they couldn't in the United States, and the U.S. should look overseas for more land. So this idea that you could pack up your bags and move out west was no longer applicable, according to Frederick Jackson Turner, and people began to look overseas for natural resources and expansion.
So it's important to realize that not all Americans did support the idea of expanding outside the continental boundaries. And there were anti-imperialists. So again, if you're anti, you are against. So there is development of something known as the Anti-Imperialist League, and key people included William Jennings Bryan, who ran for president many times, Mark Twain, a very famous author, and other presidents of colleges across the United States. So the major arguments against the expansion or imperialism was the need for self-determination, that people within a certain region should have the right to determine their own form of government and should not have it placed on them by others. Also, the issue of racial theories and tradition of isolationism. The United States going back to George Washington's farewell address, talking about being a neutral power, staying isolated, and not intertwining itself in foreign affairs.
So breaking down self-determination a little bit more, anti-imperialists argued that acquiring these territories and people violated self-determination or the ability for them to choose their own form of government. And they actually pointed to the Declaration of Independence. It basically argued, weren't these people deprived of the same rights that led to America's Declaration of Independence, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? So this is going to be a major argument against acquiring overseas territory.
As we already mentioned, racial theories were also part of the discussion against imperialism. Unfortunately, we've talked about through much of American history the idea of race. Those racial ideas also applied to foreign policy, and some Americans in the Anti-Imperialist League argue that the U.S. should not acquire lands with people of different races and cultures.
And finally, a tradition of isolationism. This is a theme that we've seen over and over in this course. Anti-imperialists are going to cite or reference George Washington's farewell address and the tradition of avoiding foreign affairs, staying out of foreign affairs. So why should the U.S. expand overseas? That's getting involved in foreign affairs.
All right, so let's quickly recap this video. Arguments for expansion were economic opportunities, the opportunities for markets and to gain natural resources. We talked about the issue of racial theories, competition with Europe, and also the frontier being closed on the continental United States. Arguments against expansion were self-determination. People have the right to determine their own form of government, should not be imposed on them by imperialist powers. Again, racial theories are present, and tradition of isolationism that we go all the way back to George Washington's farewell address with.
All right, guys, look forward to see you back here for video 32, the Spanish-American War. Thanks for watching. Best of luck on all of your tests, and have a good day.